Welcome to Hot Tea and Tall Tales. I'm Sarah Cleveland, an independent author, and this week we're going to be reviewing The Heirs of Eternity by Franc Ingram. Let's get started. So this week I have a chocolate tea. And I'm not really sure why I keep buying chocolate teas because I never like them. They always end up tasting to me like somebody boiled a Tootsie Roll. But if you do like chocolate tea, this one might be for you. This is the Harney & Sons Fine Teas Chocolate Tea, which is a black tea infused with chocolate. It says that it is the sweet, creamy flavor of chocolate. It complements this medium-bodied black tea, and its character's strong, sweet chocolate aroma. And that you should steep it for 5 minutes in boiling water, and it has 40 to 60 milligrams of caffeine. So if you like caffeine in your tea, this would be a good one for you. Not a personal favorite of mine, but I'm going to use it up. It does have the silk sachets, so if that is something you are into for single-serve tea, then this is the tea for you. So about the author. Frank is a newer independent author from Northeast Ohio. We are in the same writers group, but as I've said before, that does not influence my decisions. I did purchase the ebook initially, not for review, actually just for my personal enjoyment. Frank recently gave me a paperback copy for the purposes of this video, so there's my disclaimers. Frank loves sci-fi, good food, white wine, and has a lab named Maya. You can find her on social media on Facebook and her blog, You're What You Read. So this week's book, as we said, is The Heirs of Eternity by Franc Ingram. It is the first book in a duology, which is the Euphoria duology. Kindle estimates that the ebook is approximately equivalent to 282 pages. The paperback weighs in at 279, but that includes back matter, a sneak peek of the next book about the author, etc. The paperback is currently going for $10.90 on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and the ebook comes in at $2.99, and that's what I paid originally. Okay, so our first section is design. Now, I want to preface this section by saying that this is a completely indie book, which means that anything that was done for the book was basically done at the author's own expense, or was done by the author herself. And having put a book together in the same manner myself, I understand that it's not easy. Typesetting and fiddling to get the proportions just right for your print edition is, unless you are like really in love with that kind of thing, it's a chore. And it's even worse when you don't have the right software. So let me preface all of this with that. Now, the cover of the book. I like the art on the book. I think it's got this dreamy, ethereal kind of quality. I don't like it as the cover of the book. I don't think it has enough punch for the sci-fi genre. I think it would be really easy to kind of skip over it as you're scrolling on Amazon. It just doesn't have the action and the power that the book itself does, and so I would give the cover itself 3 teaspoons. That then brings me into the interior design. As I said, this book was not done by a professional layout person. It was not professionally typeset. It is left aligned. So typesetting really is an issue because nothing is justified. The headings are just bold. There's nothing special about them. All in all, it's like reading somebody's term paper from a design standpoint, which brings us almost down to 2 stars for the interior design, because it doesn't keep you from reading and enjoying the book. It's not distracting unless you are completely anal retentive. There was one detail about the interior design that I actually really love, though, and that is the little pop of binary for the scene dividers. For those who are curious, I popped it into a binary to ASCII converter, and it actually comes out to be a percent sign, but I still think that it's just this neat little touch, especially considering the premise of the book. So overall, I give the book 3 stars for design, simply because the cover is pretty, and the design doesn't detract from your ability to read the book. So our next section is premise. And just like last week, I'm going to read the blurb from the back of the book, so that will kind of help solidify what the premise is. And hopefully make you interested in reading it. So, here we go. In a world of sword fights and supercomputers, only the cunning survive. The 12, a collective of AIs protecting Euphoria, created hybrids to rule humanity. The first generation proved tyrannical and divided the world into 5 realms. So the 12 created the Heirs of Eternity. Alina is a computer-human hybrid created to locate and train the other 3 Heirs of Eternity. Together they will save humanity. Alina struggles to balance her violent past, addiction to alcohol, and history of failure with the task of being a good mother and leader. She and the other heirs battle for control of the planet against an old enemy in the first-generation hybrid Cornelius, who wants the world for himself, and new foes in the Phalcia warlords who thrive on the chaos. With her world on the brink of collapse and her son in danger, Alina can't afford another failure. She must let go of the burden of her past, keep her son safe, and complete the task she was designed to do: save the world. Okay, so there's some cool things in this premise, and I will say that it's a very character-driven premise, so we'll get into some things with it in the next section. But basically, Alina and these heirs, every time they fail to complete their mission, they're reincarnated, and that is the big premise, is that they fail, they're reincarnated, they try again, but they only get so many shots at it. So Alina is the only one who remembers. So the premise is that she remembers and carries the burden, and she has to find these other heirs and bring them all together to defeat their enemy. It's a really cool sci-fi fantasy kind of premise. It's somewhere in the blend between sci-fi and fantasy, where the science of it is kind of so far gone that it falls almost into the realm of feeling like magic. I think they even kind of almost refer to it in that way, because to the average person who doesn't understand it, what these heirs can do seems like magic. There's the Master of Skies, the Master of Animals, and the Master of Earth. And they all have these powers because they are partly computer, essentially. I really like the concept of the heirs and the 3 kings and Alina as their mentor. I think that's a great concept, a great premise to start the story. Where the premise kind of falls apart for me a little bit is the Ultras, which is the name that's given to those first-generation hybrids that are mentioned in the blurb. That's where my suspension of disbelief struggles a little bit. And maybe it's just the word ultra, but that's where it's hard for me to go all in on that premise. So I struggled between giving this 3 and 4 teaspoons, and I think I'm gonna give it 4. Okay, so our next section is characters, and this is a very character-driven story. Our main character, Alina, she is flawed, and she is flawed beautifully so. She struggles with addiction, she struggles with the weight of a past that only she really remembers, the weight of failure and watching the other heirs die repeatedly, and it just beats the living daylights out of her psyche. So she's this very strong but broken character who's just struggling to do the job that she was given and protect one of the heirs who she has adopted as her son. So this is really kind of her story initially. And as the heirs are brought on, there's her son Lorne, Lysander, and Leith. And now the other heirs, I didn't find them to be as strong or as interesting in this book. I will be doing a review of the second book, and that's when they kind of start to come into their own. But for me, Olenna really put this book over the top. Now, of course, they're not the only characters. The other big major character to talk about is, of course, Cornelius. I'm sorry, Frank. That name makes me laugh so hard because all I can think about is the fairy prince from the Thumbelina movie that I forget which studio, I'll put it on the screen, put out back in like 95-ish? I don't know, something like that. 97? I don't know. I'll look it up and put it on the screen. I hear Cornelius and all I can think about is, let me be your wings. I just, so, you know, he's supposed to be this big bad, like, ice demigod thing, and I've got Autumn Fairy Prince in my head. I'm sorry. I'm probably the only person that makes that association, to be honest, but it's for me personally. Cornelius is your typical just evil dude. He is drunk on power, and he wants to protect that power, and he sees the heirs as this big threat to him. He doesn't seem to have much of a character arc. He's just maniacal and evil through the whole story, which is okay because that's the kind of villain that he is. So yeah, that's the two big character conflicts. It's Olenna and Cornelius, and they are diametrically opposed to each other. There's a lot of other characters in the book, and it would take me forever if I went into all of them because there's quite a wide cast in this book, which also means that some characters don't get the time and the spotlight that they should, and then some get more spotlight than they probably should. That tends to happen with large casts. So we're going to move on to the next section. Okay, our next section is world building. Now, of course, this being a sci-fi fantasy type book, world building is so important. And there's a lot of world here. Like, Frank made a huge world. And as they're traveling around, you see kind of the different culture and the thought that was put into these different places that our characters are going. And when they encounter the Phalcia army, that's a whole other culture. And it's a culturally kind of rich book, which I enjoy. And then the whole mythos behind the heirs and the world building that brings and how, you know, Euphoria ended up the way it is. I think the world building is pretty good. Again, the ultras just bother me for some reason. So I think that's where I kind of lose it from being like 5 teaspoons, fantastic, perfect world building, down to like, more of a 4. So I'm going to give it 4 teaspoons for world building. It's a strong world, and I look forward to its development in the second book. Okay, so plot. Plot is obviously the execution of the premise. The plot in this book was strong. There is actually a twist, I want to say, at the end. It was definitely not the direction that I saw it coming. I don't want to give away any more than that, but there was a strong sense of plot. Things move forward in a logical fashion. Olenna and Lorne pick up the other heirs as they go. It's kind of in some ways your typical high adventure fantasy sci-fi novel. The plot's nothing special, I want to say, but it's well paced. So I will give it a 4 teaspoons out of 5. And our final section is writing. So this is style, tone, voice, those sorts of things. And I liked the writing in this book. I thought it was strong for the genre. It was emotive where it needed to be. Olenna's struggles were just very well portrayed by the writing. I give the writing a 5 out of 5 teaspoons. So what is the overall score for this book? My overall score is 4 out of 5 teaspoons. I really enjoyed the premise, the plot, the characters, the writing. Really the only thing that I found the least bit distracting was the name of the villain and some of the design choices with the book. I think that if the book is put out for a second edition with a little more professional polish, that will take the book to a 5 out of 5 for me personally. I think it is a great sci-fi fantasy-esque read, and I highly recommend it to anyone that is interested in those genres. I hope you've enjoyed this review of The Heirs of Eternity by Franc Ingram. I also hope that if you liked it, you will give it a thumbs up, because that always helps out. And if you do pick it up, please be sure to leave a review for the author on Amazon. That is a big help to us indie authors. Next week, in honor of Valentine's Day, I will be pulling a romance out of my stack and reviewing Soulmates by Rose Withering. So I hope that I will see you next Sunday for that review. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the little bell so you'll get notified as soon as it is up. See you next week.